Today's episode is brought to you by Positively Productive Systems, whose mission is to be the antidote to your stress and to provide compassionate productivity resources and coaching that help you heal and achieve. Be sure to check out both free and paid resources at positivelyproductive.com/resources.
There's never a season where we're not spending energy, in other words. There's never a time when we're not doing things. However, there has to be a natural cycle of going at full speed all the time. Doesn't work. That's the recipe for burnout. And I'm not talking just 1 week or 2 weeks. I'm talking like, when can you ramp down production, whatever that means for you, ideally for a certain time, place, whatever, season, and renew yourself.
You're listening to the Positively Living Podcast. I'm your host, Lisa Zaratny, founder of Positively Productive Systems and a coach certified in time and stress management, helping overwhelmed clients make space for what matters. Join me each episode as we explore ways to live a more proactive, productive life with topics and guests that speak to simplifying self-awareness, systems, and so much more. I understand overwhelm personally as a fellow multi-passionate entrepreneur, wife and mom to kids and cats, and former caregiver. I'm here to help you choose what's right for you so you can do less, live more, and breathe easier. Sound good? Let's get to it. Welcome to the Positively Living Podcast. I'm your host, Lisa, and today's topic is a favorite of mine and my guests. Seasonal planning is an incredibly efficient, though potentially underutilized approach, which is why I shared it with you in episode 119 on how productivity is impacted by seasonal energy. But I wanted to dig into it further to figure out why it works so well for us and to explore what I've seen in my clients, who are primarily multi-passionate and neurodiverse. Using seasons within our lives to choose what's best for us not only helps us manage our energy, it gives us built-in permission to embrace variety. And that's something that we crave. That newness can be enticing. And when you make things more interesting, when you bring in the new, it can help keep you going. If you hear more excitement than usual in my voice today, that's because of the guest who's joining me. I'm fangirling a bit here because I've listened to his show, Beyond the To-Do List, for almost as long as he's had it. My guest today is Erik Fisher, producer and host of the Beyond the To-Do List podcast, which has been airing for over 10 years at this point. Erik's talked with productivity experts like David Allen and Gretchen Rubin and so many more, and they've shared how they implement productivity strategies in their personal and professional lives. His mission is to explore all aspects of productivity as a means toward the true end goal, living a meaningful life. You've heard a version of that so many times here, right? I mean, what's the point of productivity? To live well, to live more. That's what Erik is about too. In our conversation today, we cover what seasonality means and the kinds of seasons in our lives, from nature to personal and lots of nuances in between. We also discuss how seasons can encourage us to embrace change and how rest, as part of that seasonality, is productive, which I will shout from the rooftops as long as I'm able. If you're digging this topic today and you want to keep going with aspects of it, I'll link to some prior episodes in the show notes that involve seasonal productivity, embracing change, decluttering your mind, and tackling your to-do list. Erik was kind enough to finish off our conversation, I swear to you without me asking, with a mental decluttering recommendation. He offers a fantastic first step relating to embracing the seasonal planning approach. It starts with decluttering your mind, and then there's a shift you can take to start the seasonal planning. If you'd like guidance on the mind sweep he mentions, which is a phrase used by David Allen of getting things done, I have a worksheet that can help that's based on David's mind sweep. I mention this and actually go into details about it on episode 140 on decluttering your mind with one simple step, and it's called the Focus File. You can access it for free through my multi-passionate toolkit on the website, positivelyproductive.com, or you can access it along with a ton of other worksheets, bonus workbooks, and mini training videos in the resources vault. For that, you'll go to positivelyproductive.com/vault to purchase. I am so excited to introduce you to Erik today, and I know you're going to love his productivity wisdom as well as his voice. Let's join him now. Welcome to the Positively Living Podcast, Erik Fisher. I am beyond excited to have you here talking about something far beyond the to-do list.
Awesome. Thank you for having me. It is a privilege to be here.
Before we dig into the topic that both you and I have really vibed on, I would love it if you'd share a bit about who you are, what you do, and what makes you light up.
First and foremost, I'm Erik Fisher. I've been podcasting now for with this show, over 10 years. I've done various co-hosting things before that. So I would say, man, at this point, I've probably got, including concurrent shows that I did at certain points, probably over 15 years of podcasting experience, if I had to estimate.
Nice.
So podcasting is a passion of mine. And then it's, okay, what's the topic? Well, obviously, the thing I've done the most podcasting about has been productivity and the show Beyond the To-Do List, to be able to branch out into all those disparate threads that connect to who you are and what you do and how you do it and do it better and manage your time and work-life balance and all those things that play a part of that, a multi-ring Venn diagram, if you will, of you. And then the second thing that I have probably podcasted about the most has been social media / marketing in day job, or a show I did before Beyond the To-Do List, which was called Social Media Serenity. And that had to do with early days of social media and using it without being used by it. And that was telling. And that was also productivity in a sense when it came to social media. So, and then what makes me light up? Connection with people, my friends, my family, new people, learning about them, their stories, diving into them. I think that's what helps me be a natural conversationalist when it comes to the podcast. That's what I try to do. It's not an interview show. It's a conversation, and the audience gets to listen in.
Yeah, and I've listened to so many of them. And to that point, when you want that connection and you want that curiosity, you get so much more out of it. And that's how I feel about productivity, is that one of the things you said was, knowing who you are. Also, thank you for mentioning one of my love languages, which is Venn diagrams.
I think there's not an episode these days that I don't say the words Venn diagram and do the crossover of usually just 2 circles, but who knows, maybe more.
You never know. And right now I have a Venn diagram staring at me on my whiteboard with 3 circles. It has to do with how I approach productivity with clients and their strengths, their personality, and their values. But what I love about the conversations that you have had is that it is so holistic, and it is bringing in people to think about things, reframe them, think about them differently, ask questions, be curious.
And I know we're going to get into this. We're going to talk about seasonality and seasons. And my podcast has had seasons where you get to a point and you think, or you basically you take the pulse of, am I curious about this anymore? Is there anywhere else left to go? And you kind of feel that fading / renewal cycle happen. I would say there's probably been about 5 at least different, if not from an outwardly perceptible perspective, an inward perspective. My show's been about 5 different shows over the course of those 10 years. And so every 2.5, 3 years, it's kind of like, okay, what's the cycle? What's new? What's most important for people when it comes to productivity these days?
Yeah. And the same thing goes with my podcast. And it's hard to believe sometimes. I'm like, wow, I'm over 150 episodes. When you have that many conversations, it's like thinking about, how can you come at them differently? Or how can you come at them in a way that complements the other conversations or maybe digs in deeper into a point? But it does all come down to curiosity. It comes down to change and like what's happening in the world right now. So let's dig into this idea of seasonality. And that's what you and I talked about a bit, where we're like, okay, so what is like beyond the standard of productivity? What's something we're not thinking about so much? And this is something you've been feeling a lot lately, right? Is that seasonality?
Yeah, seasonality. And it's not a new concept. It's something that I thought about all along, but that's the nature of it. It's seasons. It's, it comes and goes. There's the ebb and the flow. typically we throw the word season out, and there's two or three quick, easy grabs when it comes to that in terms of the concept. So the seasons of the year, obviously, the four seasons. We've got, not the singing group, although they're great. Summer, winter, spring, and fall. And there's a natural, nature rhythm to the cycle of the earth spinning. But what I'm saying here is when it comes to those four seasons, there's a lot of great poetry and classical writing on these when it comes to when we were in an agrarian society with farming. You didn't plant or yield anything from the ground during certain times of the year. And we just don't think about that because one, most of us are one step removed from thinking about where our food comes from, first off. And second of all, we're not involved in it. So we're not conscious of it. So we work in this, okay, well, we have electric lights. We can be, we can be awake at all times. We can stay up late. We can get up early. We can work anywhere and everywhere, even though that's probably not what we should be doing. Just because you can doesn't mean you should.
Amen to that.
But you apply that then to your body, your life, your mind, your spirit, and everything. And you think, oh, I can't always be on. So the most microcosm of a season is the daily rituals that we have when it comes to, we've got a certain amount of day where it's light and you can be awake, and then you have to recharge. And so you bring that out to the macro level of the four seasons I'm talking about, or even further out to a macro level of a metaphorical season of life. That's a third kind of take. That's one people are pretty familiar with, but we don't pay a lot of attention to that. And again, with productivity, you do hear a lot about daily rituals on the micro side. You expand that out into quarterly, very business-like approach to it. When it's like, I've got to hit my quarterly goals and I've got to close this year out and start the next year out strong. In a way, I'm kind of outlining all the things we can talk about here.
Thank you for that.
Macro level, step up again. It's yearly, it's annually. And then you hear people, again, talk about seasons of life. And that's where you get into that stiff and business-like. Is that, what's your 5-year plan? That's kind of what that looks like.
Sorry, I just pulled a muscle rolling my eyes at that one, but okay.
And there's one more that kind of goes further than that whole 5-year plan. It's the, what hats are you wearing? What commitments have you made long term? So, for example, at the time of this recording, we're about a week and a half from my 18-year-old daughter finishing her high school classes. And then a week and a half later, she's walking the stage. And then I'm no longer the parent of a high schooler. And in fact, the parenting role shifts. That season of young parenting to old parenting, we're kind of transitioning out of that. And so there's a season there of, if you've got young kids, that's a season. If you got old kids, that's a season. If you've got an empty nest, that's a season. That's one example. There's different career modes with that and different, and that's not to say, with births and deaths and anyway, aging, it happens.
Now, I like this distinction of the season of life and then also the season of, commitment or responsibilities or hats that you wear. Because originally I was thinking of those as combined, but I guess you could see it as the season of life for you personally, your abilities physically, mentally, how we change as women. I'm now in a season of life where I'm like, oh, hello, perimenopause and menopause. And isn't this interesting? And it changes how your brain works and, what your body is doing physically and things like that. So yeah, I could see the distinction with those. But the real key in all of this, and it's something that I bring this lens to it, but I also feel it from the way you're describing it, is the idea that there's so much ebb and flow to this, but that when we do talk about it, let's say, for example, the daily rituals, when we talk about it in, the productivity sense, a lot of times I'm hearing it from you need to be doing this, this, and this. And there's no consideration of, if that makes sense for you. So it's the idea, yes, a daily ritual is important, a daily pattern, having the habits, but the where and the when and the what needs to be specific to you. And I feel like that's what you and I are trying to get into, as opposed to just take a list from someone else.
Yeah, exactly. And you kind of are hitting on that and hinting at it even without knowing it, maybe, when you're talking about, you yourself and your capabilities and how that plays into a season. But also, again, with the hats, it's unique and different for everybody. For me right now, my age, I have certain gifts and capabilities and aptitudes. And then a different hat is the parenting thing I talked about earlier. And then yet another one is, volunteering, or yet another one is what I'm doing with my podcast, or another hat. So podcast, and then career wise and different positions with that. And so it's not ever going to be the same for you
Mhm.
season wise as it is for anybody else. You can listen to a podcast week in and week out about productivity and glean and learn new things from people that aren't you, but you can't do a cookie cutter application. But you can say, well, they walked this path in this way. My path's different, but what they said was this, and that really stuck with me. And I can kind of pull out that lesson and then apply it to mine. I mean, again, we all see a movie that has a specific lesson, but it hits us all in different ways.
I love that. Okay, so now we have all these different types of seasons. Let's start using some examples. And also, I do want to touch upon the fact that this is something that I see that really works for those who are neurodiverse. And I got to say, that is a word that I'm starting to think, well, should we be using it? Because I feel like we all are, but we all work differently. And I think that's to your point, right? That's why self-awareness is so important. But for those that I work with and that I live with who are neurodiverse, I think that there's some magic in this intentional choice and approaching seasonality, not only as, oh, well, okay, something's shifting, so I have to go with it, but rather proactively saying, hey, let's look for the seasonality and change what we do accordingly. Have you noticed that there's a satisfaction in being able to do it that way?
Yes, because this kind of goes in tandem with one of the hardest things for people to do is to come to a point where change is something that they accept. I mean, we all bristle under it. We all have friction with change as it happens. And yet it's the one constant that we have had since we've been aware of our own existence, is that change just keeps happening. I am
Yeah.
not the same little kid I was. I am not the same teenager or newlywed or new father or middle-aged person. I guess that's kind of where I'm at now, but whatever. I'm not even the middle-aged person I was a few years ago when I didn't need to wear glasses like I do now, 3 years in. That's just constant change. And I think one of the things is that one thing stops and another starts. And we often feel like, no, this has to go on forever. This is the way it's going to always be, for better or for worse. And having that kind of flexibility when it comes to time, I love time travel, but there's a certain point where you say, you know what, going back and changing anything doesn't make sense. It's about acceptance of what happened and rolling with it and flowing with it and riding it and accepting it and always continually growing and making positive change and
Mm.
choices in the light of the inevitability that change is constant.
Absolutely. We had a conversation on the podcast. It's been a while now, but it was a really good conversation about change and, the distinction of whether you're choosing it or whether it's thrust upon you and, all the things that that go with that, right? It's definitely there's a lot going on in there, but the fact is that acceptance, it sounds like you're giving up, but it's actually a powerful tool.
It's kind of like that word compromise that I was just saying to somebody the other day, that, oh no, they're compromising their value. I'm like, no, compromise is the word where you're compromising, they're compromising, and it's not a negative word. It's you're coming together, you're meeting. Same thing with acceptance. You accept something. I receive it. In other
Mm.
words, I accept your gift. I accept and I receive that thing, whatever it is. And so it's an acknowledgement, not a like an acquiescence. That's a better word for what we were talking about. I acquiesce. It's not giving up. It's moving on. Again, that's one of the things. It's like the word quit, which was what I was kind of going with earlier, where things start and things stop. Well, knowing when things should appropriately stop or when to quit something because it's now no longer necessary or appropriate or whatever, that can be a very healthy thing. It's when you quit things that you shouldn't be quitting. But again, it's knowing which is right and which is wrong at the time. And it's, again, variables.
Yeah, and making the best choice that you can at the time. I realize that it's a four-letter word, but we don't have to treat it like one. It can be a really good thing. But to me, it goes back to the intentionality of it. When you take into consideration everything that's going on, where you are in your life, what's happening these different seasons, then you get to, and I love that phrase, you get to, right? Make the choice that says, okay, this fades away, this comes in, or maybe it's a hit pause. because that does happen with the seasons, right? Or the nature seasons that you were talking about. And I really like using the nature seasons to orchestrate things that I do in my business in terms of whether I'm working on my business or in my business. And what I mean by that is I do coaching year round. So I'm always working in my business. But for some reason, during those quiet winter months when I'm like, I don't want to go outside. Yes, I'm in New York. Yes, I know how to handle the snow, but it's cold and I like being cozy inside. Well, that coziness feeds my desire to read even more than I do and to learn. So most of my certifications I've gotten in the December, January time period.
Yeah, and that's a great time to do it. It's also for somebody complete opposite. They would say, ooh, that's the time for me to really conserve my energy. In other words, conserve energy. And I'm trying to think of the best way to put this. There's never a season where we're not expending energy, spending energy, in other words. There's never a time when we're not doing things. However, there has to be a natural cycle of going at full speed all the time. Doesn't work. That's the recipe for burnout. And I'm not talking just 1 week or 2 weeks. I'm talking like, when can you ramp down production, whatever that means for you, ideally for a certain time, place, whatever season, and renew yourself. And again, a lot of what goes towards that and safeguards against that is the micro level, the daily
Mm.
ritual, day in, day out, and week in and week out, where those can bolster, yes, going longer without having those longer seasons of, but again, I just can't do it. I'll give you an example. One of the I mentioned this earlier. One of the things that in the past few years or more than that, there's been this thing in the business world where it's, for me, time when I'm worn out for the year, it's the end of the calendar year. It's somewhere in that late October. We're really like, once November, December, January, like those 3 months, I'm just like, oh man, I'm not all about closing this year strong. I already should have, like, I should be done by now. I should be doing less and I should be doing admin tasks, not heavy hitting, strong, big lifting of closing out the year strong and then starting the year strong stuff. That's no, 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 no. Let me have already finished and then let me, I don't want to say coast, but well, maybe coast is the right word. Building up the momentum and having done the hard, heavy lifting and true, strong momentum building work so that you can coast while resting, but you're still in motion.
Absolutely. Or if you think about it like visually, like a hill, right? Where you're working hard and you're pulling up to the top and then you coast down a hill, you're actually going faster.
Yeah.
So however you want to look at it, it's the ebb and flow. It's not just the seasons of life, but also the seasons of our energy expenditure and trying to align those. To your point too, and you mentioned this before in response to an example that I gave, here's where self-awareness and knowing what we feel and what drains our energy, extroverts and introverts, or wherever you are on the spectrum, great example of, well, that energizes you, but that drains the heck out of me, right? It's that distinction. Well, for me, when I talked about, getting certifications and reading, to me, cozying up and reading and absorbing information isn't expenditure. It's feeding me. Now, I'm also doing it at a pace. I didn't mention this. I'm taking my time. I'm not forcing or rushing. I'm absorbing, I'm taking in something that really feeds me because I love to read, I love to learn. These are all values of mine. So that's why it fits in that time frame for me. But if that sounds like, something that's really difficult and challenging to you, well, then that's not the thing to be doing during that time. That may actually be something to do during the spring or summer months when you feel more energized. Yeah, you have to know what works for you.
Yeah, that's exactly right. You do need to have that self-awareness level there. And I can tell you right now, like for me, yeah, I could get away with, which isn't probably the right way to frame it, but I could be involved with during that kind of, again, winter months or whatever. I could be occupying my time during that season with taking a course or doing reading that's not just purely for enjoyment. But if I can flip my switch perspective wise and say, well, I'm doing this for fun, even though it is air quotes work, you can kind of sneak past some of that stuff as long as, again, you're not firing on all cylinders up till that point, through that point, and beyond it. There needs to be a shift in, it's kind of like a play on that whole phrase. I always butcher it, but it's like you find something that you love to do and then get paid for it. And then you never feel like you're working a day in your life, because I have found that to be true and false at different times. I've kind of been like love hate with it. But I will say this, I think that it's not that it's true or false. It's that it's having the right perspective on that phrase. And so it's like having the right perspective on, it's not that I have to, I get to. And if you can flip that when it comes to that season or different seasons, when it comes to doing things in seasons that are best for you, it's ultimately knowing which seasons are best for you. It's personal for me. Seasonal affective disorder, for me, that's a big knockout punch. And so I am fighting against myself to try and get more done during that time. Instead, that's a season where I should be doing less output. That's just natural for me. For others, no, they can go hibernate in a cave and do work in that cave. I'm the opposite. I want to sleep in the cave and literally hibernate.
There you go. And that's so important, because when we think about productivity or producing in that sense as cyclical, right? If you think about how it averages out across whatever, across a week, across a year, whatever it happens to be, then you do get to very easily and very efficiently get that time in which you are, quote, not productive. I want to be so careful with that. I want to throw air quotes everywhere. And so that we're not taking on something that doesn't belong to us in this perception that rest or sleeping that whole time is not productive. It's so productive because it's productive within the cycle of you needing that recharge. And thank you for segueing perfectly into the one thing that I did have on my notes I wanted to make sure we talked about, like seasonal affective disorder. When you're looking at the seasons of the year and you know that that's a time that hits you hard, that's energy management right there. And for me, we also have the new year kind of thing that comes up all the time. And I rail against it. I have episodes. I'm like, stop with the resolutions and start more with the reflection. Feel free to take time to reflect, but don't resolve that as of January 1, especially, if you're living where I do and you have seasonal affective disorder, that is not the time to be like, let's hit the ground running. Or like you said, close the year strong. All of these hard hitting. It feels like what I describe as you're forcing as opposed to finessing. And what we're talking about with seasonality is finessing it, right?
Yeah, definitely. And that's such a more appropriate word than forcing. And really that's the whole point is when you're forcing things, there are times when you do have to kind of just, I'm trying to think of what the buck up. That's one of the things that my wife says. You buck up and you get it done. And that's true. Sometimes there are times where you just have to do the thing and you don't want to do it, but you do it anyway. And that's true. But that is not an appropriate perspective on life at all times.
Right.
Seasonal perspective.
And if you have the seasonal perspective and you understand where you need energy and where you can take breaks and you have that built in, you can also take this buck up moment and make it a temporary thing. I am so careful with, the push that seems to come in productivity language and discussion. And I'm like, this is not boot camp style here. This is compassionate productivity where we understand what's really going on. It doesn't mean we're making excuses. You still have to get things done. But how can you do it in a way that serves you and soothes you and takes care of you? So seasonality is for sure. So if we're like, okay, you got to buck up in this one particular case, then you talked about this before, ramping up and ramping down. I use that as an example. So you had what I like to call a sprint, right? Sometimes you got to run, you got to go. And then you take the time to rest and recover. It's when we just put it back to back all the time and don't give ourselves that opportunity because somehow we think that down cycle, that rest cycle, the planting as opposed to sowing, you know what I mean? However you want to look at it, somehow we're thinking that isn't productive, but it's essential.
Yes, definitely.
We've talked about different things to consider, different steps, some examples that you love. As we're thinking about different seasons of our life or maybe challenges that we have, like frustrated that maybe we don't have the same abilities as before, whatever it is that we're going through, what would you say to encourage us and to think about like what a next step could be or a next couple steps?
Yeah, I mean, here's the thing. It really is about self-awareness when it comes to this. And this is why bucket lists are great. This is why someday maybe lists are great because it's like, no, there'll be a season for that coming up. It's almost like Christmas at some point in the future, and you just don't know when it is. It's not a set date on the calendar, but you've got a list for it. You've got a bunch of, you've got your future self Christmas list that you're going to use at some point, right?
Love that.
And to be able to look forward to those things is really encouraging and exciting. And it's good to have that list to pull back out and look at, especially in times of, well, I don't know if I should quit this thing. Well, wait, if now is the time for that thing to end, or if it's naturally aging itself out, whatever it is, that role, that expectation, that relationship, that job, that who knows what, if it's time for that to end, well, that means then there's room for
Mm.
something else, whether that's room for some more nothing and rest and relaxation. Great. I'm all for that. If it's now time for, hey, you've always wanted to write that book, or you've wanted to start and continue doing that, pick that podcast back up that you quit a long time ago. It's time now to pick up cooking. You've always wanted to do that, or an instrument. You need to have those reflect. It's like you were talking about earlier with those reflection times. And I kind of do it's kind of quarterly, and I kind of make it a big old hodgepodge of stuff, business, career, whatever. I'll do the David Allen brain dump thing where I'll have a legal pad. I won't do this digitally, but I'll do a legal pad because then I'm not staring at a screen, and I'll just kind of let my mind, I just clear my mind, clear my head. Just, oh yeah, no, I was thinking about this, or, oh yeah, I was thinking about, I don't know, when do I need to get a new car? Or, how long is that the one we got last? Should I sell it? Should I gift it? Should I, all those different things. Once you start pulling those out and getting them out of your head and down on paper, and you can even look it over, you can group them together, you can look it over, you can ask yourself questions of, or you can even ask no questions, to be honest. You can just get it all out of your head. You'd be
Mhm.
surprised how freeing up your mental RAM can be when it comes to that. But just doing that and getting it out in front of your eyes instead of inside of your head where it's messed with everything else, thoughts, feelings, etc. It's just getting it out and getting it down. And, I've come away with 3 to 5 different pages of legal pad. I actually haven't done it in a while.
Yeah, this is your sign.
But that's the thing, is like, if you can do that, if you can take a periodic, it's going to vary for person to person. It also helps to do it maybe on a weekly basis too.
Mhm.
But to do it on macro-ish level, I should say, of like once a quarter, once every 3 months or so, and then micro level it as well. But if you can do that, if you can get that out in front of you and be aware of what you think and you feel and what's on your mind, especially subconscious, because if you don't do this, you can't dig into the subconscious stuff and really start to work with that and be aware of that as well. Why am I so derailed all the time? Well, because you've got something on your mind that you're not even aware of consciously. So
Absolutely. It's like draining the energy of a battery. I swear I did not pay Erik to say these things, but that's why we're so aligned and why I've been listening to him for so long. Yeah, I'm a big fan of David Allen, and based on, the idea of the mind sweep, some people call it a brain dump. I created a worksheet for all my clients that is very much based on that. I call it the focus file, but it's the idea of getting it all out in that safe space. And you're right, that one step has huge benefits, but I'm really loving how there's a sort of subsection to this that you're talking about that is a great step for today. As you're getting all those things out of your mind, there are to-dos and there are worries and there are deadlines and things, but there's also the I want tos and I wish I coulds and things like that. And that maybe list, that bucket list is in there. And it's brilliant to be able to pull that out, put that down, and then say, okay, let's not panic. It's not going to happen. It's not right now, but it could be. Where do we find the space and where do we find the right season for it? I love that.
it's only by doing some of this, I call it homework.
Yep.
I've always hated that word, but I use it anyway. It's by doing that work and really becoming aware of your thoughts, feelings, etc. when it comes to this, that you can start to even decide things, make quick decisions, put things away and say, and procrastinate on purpose on other things and say, no, that's a yes, but it's not right now. It's a not yet decision.
And when you do this bit of work, right, it yields so much goodness because then it helps you, especially when we have, minds that work so differently, we need them as clear as possible to function at their best, right? To not feel overwhelmed. We need the variety that comes from doing those things that we love. And when we do them at the right time, that's why I love describing productivity as the right things at the right time, the right way for you. That's what this is. Okay.
The right thing at the right time. That has to do with seasons as well.
Absolutely. Okay. That is a beautiful place for us to wrap up. And before we get into our fun little rapid wrap up, I'd love it if you'd share where we can find you online, Erik.
Yeah. Well, the best place is at beyondthetodolist.com. That's where the show is. That's also where you can connect with me on social accounts, etc. Although if you want to go there, pretty much any social account, you can go to it and just type in Erik with a K, the letter J, Fisher, Erik J. Fisher.
Okay. I'll make sure to have that in the show notes. Are you ready for this rapid wrap up?
Ready.
All right. So fill in the blanks. So let's start with a song that lifts my spirits, makes me dance.
I will say that most people will not suspect this, but it is. I've heard it way too many times recently and over the years to deny it. It is "I'm Every Woman" by Whitney Houston.
Yeah, baby.
I love
the
it.
best answer I have gotten.
It just
Yes.
fits. Yeah.
It just fits. And man, it's a vibe. It's a total vibe. So I'm loving it. And that's going on the Positively Living Podcast Spotify dance playlist. I think we might still be on volume 3. So we will groove to that with you. Okay. How about a quote or a mantra that inspires me or that I love to share?
I made this one up and I'm not ashamed to say that, but it's good ideas come from many ideas.
I like it.
It basically, it was my spin on there's no stupid ideas or no bad ideas. It was more like, no, just get as many ideas as you can. And then wait, you'll find one good one, or you'll combine multiple bad ones into a good one. So good ideas come from many ideas. Have many ideas.
I love that. Feels like a numbers game to me, but to that
Yeah.
point, it is. It's thinking, it's creating, it's taking action. It's all the good stuff. Okay. Now, how about a resource? It could be a book or an app, just anything that has made my life better.
I have to say it's Brain FM that I use pretty much every day. And what it does is essentially it is music that is created with sound design scientifically to block that fight or flight response in your brain. It helps zone in or get into certain brainwave settings quicker so that you can focus, you can read, you can sleep, you can I will put it in my ears and take like a 20-minute nap and feel amazing. I can put it in my ears and sit and work for 2 hours straight or for 1 hour or whatever. Time passes quickly. It gets your brain waves into a certain state faster for whatever your topic or task at hand is. And I love it.
So you can literally dial it in to whether you're looking for relaxation state or like a flow state of work or whatever.
Yes. There's focus, there's different degrees of that.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're looking to rest, there's like go to sleep for the night kind of sound. And these are interesting. Like some of them there's different versions. There's classical, there's techno, there's instrumental, there's movie soundtrack sounding stuff. It's all over the spectrum when it comes to the functionality as well as the form of the style of the music.
Nice. And if they get a Whitney one, you'll be golden, right?
There you go. There's stuff that's close.
All right. I love it. Okay. And last, as a bonus one, but it's definitely not least, what are you grateful for today, Erik?
Like I said, I have a daughter who's graduating soon. I am grateful that we've made it this far. Sometimes you just don't know. It feels like we're not going to get there. It feels like it's never going to end, but it's going to end. And, it may be a big, scarier thing for university life and work to be coming in, but I feel like she's growing to the point where she can do that. So I'm grateful.
Congrats to all of you for getting that far. That's definitely something to celebrate. And speaking of gratitude, I am so grateful for you. I'm grateful for your podcast, as I said, which, really kicked off the support of my career as a productivity coach. And I'm grateful for you and the time that you've taken to join me today and to share your wisdom and for shining your light really bright in this world. And I thank you for sharing it with us.
Oh, thank you. I am so glad to have been able to do that.
Thank you for joining me today. Your time is precious and limited, and I'm honored you chose to spend it with me. If you have feedback, questions, or want to schedule a chat, head to positivelyproductive.com/connect. And if you are looking for any of the resources referenced on the podcast, from books to products to training and more, go to positivelyproductive.com/resources.